right, we're going to pick up where we left off with our line graph, and we're going to start by trying to disaggregate a bit here. I'm going to look at each of my points on this line, and I can see here that in each year, I've got roughly 1.4 million. As I move along here, I get into 1.5 million. This is basically telling us these are all of the students across all schools in the state of North Carolina that are part of our data set. And it is always important to kind of start out by making sure that this makes sense. And I do know from prior work that this is a reasonable number for the full set of students. If it were too low, I may be missing some data. If it's too high, I may have multiple indicators that I'm aggregating together that I don't necessarily mean to. And so this is always a good first check just to make sure that my numbers make sense. So I want to start by doing a little bit of disaggregation here. And I'm going to start with my LEA code. So basically what I want to do is, instead of having one line graph for all of the schools combined, I want to combine together by LEA. So I'm going to simply add this over as a color. That will also do the trick of disaggregating for me. Click, drag it over to color. I'm going to go ahead and add all the members, even though this is going to look terrible. And if you notice here, I've got my line for each individual LEA in the state. And there's a couple of things that I notice here. I've got two at the top. You can probably guess which of the two LEAs in North Carolina are the largest and that are going above the rest. We also have this pink line that's kind of on a different trend. If I notice here, the LEA code, this is marked as charter schools. And not particularly surprising, and this is an easy way for us to visualize the growth of student enrollment in charter schools from the period of 2006 through 2018. Now this is all fine and good, but if you notice here, all I have are my LEA codes. And this is great if you know all of your LEA codes by heart, but for most users, it's probably going to be better to have the names of the districts in our data set. Now, unfortunately, we do not have district name associated with an LEA code currently in our data set. So we want to have the LEA names, but we don't currently have those in our data set. Now, we've got a lot of LEA codes here. We actually have all of the LEAs in the state, which is 115 plus charter schools, which would be a lot to change manually. If we just had a few and we did want to change them manually, we can right-click here in the legend on any given mark, click on Edit Alias, and actually type in the name of the LEA right here. But a couple of reasons we don't want to do this. One, it's going to be very time-consuming. And two, there's also a pretty decent likelihood we could make an error somewhere. And so we want to try to link this with a reliable data set that has all of our LEA codes. And we're going to be able to do this through linking our current data to another data set. And we do that by going up here into our pane, right-clicking, and editing our data source once more. So we've already been through all of this. And we're actually not limited in Tableau to just linking to a single data set. We can actually link to multiple data sets from our base file. And that's exactly what we're going to do right now. So if I go up here to Connections and I click on Add, go to my Microsoft Excel, we actually have another file. This is the NC LEA code and name lookup table. And this is basically, as we've explored before, going to have our LEA codes, and it's going to have our names, and we're going to be able to associate those two with each other. I'm going to go ahead and click Open. And if I notice here, this new file, it shows up here in the connections, it's got its own color of green. I see green here for that tab, and I also see green data right here. Now, notice here that Tableau is going to, again, default to joining our data for us, which is great. In this case, though, we don't necessarily want an inner join. So as it turns out, we have one of our lines in our data set that represents charter schools, and our LEA code name lookup actually does not contain a blanket code for charter schools. So as this currently sits right now, if we do an inner join, we're going to have charter schools that show up in our location data that don't show up on the right-hand side in the code name lookup. And so in effect, if we do an inner join, we're going to lose all of our charter schools. Instead, what we want to do here is actually this left join. So this is going to take all of the data that we saw from our previous location file and link it all to LEA codes where they show up in our other data set. So what this does here is if we have something in our location file that does not line up with something in our LEA codename lookup, it just shows up as a blank, or as Tableau calls it, a null value. So we're going to use our first left join for this particular case right here. Finally, we're going to take a look at our variables here, and we just have three simple variables. We have LEA code, name, and whether or not it's in the large district consortium. We don't need to link on multiple variables. All we need to link on is the LEA code, so I don't have anything else to add there. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And when I go back to sheet 1, what I'm expecting to see is the option to include the variables that were part of my other file. And in effect, that's exactly what I get here. I see a new drop-down with this LEA codename lookup table, and I see my three variables from that. And so now, instead of looking at my LEA codes, I want to pop in these LEA names. I can do that very simply here. I want to get rid of my LEA codes just by dragging that off of the marks card and dropping it. Notice that it's going to re-aggregate my data to these statewide totals. And now I'm going to take my LEA name, click and drag it over to color. I'm going to again add all of my members. And I'm going to see what I'm expecting here. And I actually have LEA names now attached to each of my lines. Now, I do have an issue, and it's one that we kind of saw coming, that we didn't have anything associated with that CH code that was there for charter schools. In fact, this line is showing up over here in our legend as null. Now, we did our checking before and saw that this line is in fact the same shape. It's the same one that was associated with that CH code. And in fact here, if I pull back over my LEA code just to show up in the tooltip, I can see that, well, the LEA code associated with this each time is in fact that CH. So where I see null over here in the LEA name, I can actually right-click on it, and now I'm going to actually edit that alias. And instead of showing up as null, I want this to show up as charter schools. And if I change that right here, click OK, click back in my main field, notice that where I see the LEA code as CH, it now is associated with the LEA name of charter schools. So if I have just a couple of values like this that aren't available in my other data set, I could either go back and add them into my Excel file, or I can change it right here in Tableau by editing the alias. So this is a look at the LEA graphs. We're now going to take this and map it onto looking at individual schools in our next video.